someone asked me what I think is one of the most critical civil rights issue of our time that's on a daily basis. And I said, I think it's not even in the Bill of Rights, it's the fact that Americans feel like they have to lie every day to get through the day. They have to lie about pronouns. They have to lie about the person in the cubicle next to them being qualified if they aren't. They have to pretend to laugh at and like certain types of jokes, late night comedians when they don't agree with them. They have to tell their friend in the book club that it's really cool that they're transitioning their 5-year-old child when they don't believe that. It's ultimately very corrosive to our souls, but also to our society to constantly be lying. So personally, I feel it's very refreshing to not have to lie.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dhillon, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Thanks for having me.
Well, welcome us to your building. Thank you for hosting us here at the DOJ. So glad to be having this conversation with you because there is no one in American politics that I can think of who has more experience addressing the threat of left-wing violence, particularly on college campuses and how it threatens free speech. Both of us lost a friend 2 weeks ago now in Charlie Kirk. I know you had a personal relationship with him. He'd call you in and say, hey, I have friends of mine who have their free speech suppressed, or students of mine who are having their free speech suppressed. Can you help us out?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
These last 2 weeks have been difficult for all of us, but how's it been for you?
Yeah, no, I got to know Charlie actually back in the era where you and I first met when I was representing the Berkeley College Republicans suing UC Berkeley. And at that time, Turning Point was a relatively younger organization, but they were bringing speakers to campus, and like my client, Young America's Foundation. I know you guys engaged with them at that point. So since that time, they grew. And, of course, as a member of the Republican National Committee, I really worked a lot with the Turning Point folks, Turning Point Action, when I ran for RNC chair. And so we used to text and talk regularly. I was a guest on his show many times. And he came to visit us in the DOJ just a few weeks before he passed away to talk about some important issues that his organizations were working on. And so, yeah, it's even still hard to believe, like such a huge but young life snatched away, and what it means for all of us. I mean, what it means for me as a DOJ official who takes on controversial cases is I've increased my security. Been to court just yesterday and was escorted by U.S. Marshals. So, we've increased our security in response to these threats, and that's really unfortunate. America is such a free and open country. It's not some, place which you would think would be as dangerous, and yet evil people, violent people are threatened by the ideas of liberty that we're all promoting in this administration. And so it's just such a difficult time. But whatever our loss is as friends, you just look at his family and you understand the perspective, and that kind of pain just is kind of just almost unimaginable. So yeah, it's very sobering. I think we're seeing a revival of faith in our country in response to this. That's a positive thing. Charlie would have liked to see that. And hopefully it's sustainable, because that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about here in the Department of Justice is protecting our citizens' rights to worship whatever faith they want freely, not have their houses of worship attacked, and not have their way of life impaired because of their faith. So, all of these things are coming together, and we will honor him best, I think, by continuing to fight for those principles that he held so dear.
And you sit at the nexus of all those issues that he cared about so deeply: religious liberty, Christianity, bringing that faith into the public square, free speech, dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that is where the Civil Rights Office and the DOJ really exists. And I'm so glad that you brought up your relationship with Charlie, stretching back to the first Trump administration, those early days of the campus free speech wars. It seems like every day you check the news and there's another example of left-wing violence, oftentimes on college campuses, but elsewhere in the public square as well. You've interacted with these universities on a number of cases. You understand how these administrations work. How have these universities gotten to this point where it just seems like day after day we find out there's another professor talking about how Charlie Kirk was just the tip of the iceberg, or there's another professor that talks about how there should be a violent Marxist uprising in the United States. I mean, how did these places become such hives of leftism?
Well, I would say the campus free speech wars probably do date back to, Socrates in the Athenian Agora. So it's actually been a constant in academia that young people are liberal and their professors are accused of corrupting them. I mean, that's literally the story. I certainly experienced it in college when I was at Dartmouth in the 1980s. The fads of the day then were trying to force the school to divest from companies that did business in South Africa. Mm-hmm. That was one. And then there was the liberation theology movement of Marxists and priests in Central America, and a lot of violence that came out of that. So those are the big issues then. The issues have just simply morphed to other issues, and today it's free Palestine. The free Nicaragua people have become the free Palestine people. But unique in the world, this country has this robust tradition of the First Amendment. And, generally it applies to public institutions like UC Berkeley, but there are some aspects of it that are now almost touching almost every institution. And so, I've been a free speech lawyer for decades. And even when I was at Dartmouth, my newspaper was under attack by our administration, and some of my colleagues were suspended, and we had to go to court to get them reinstated. We won. And so I've been fighting the speech wars on the campuses for close to 4 decades now. So today, the scope of the investment of the federal government into these schools is massive, trillions and trillions of dollars. And almost every one of the 6,000 plus institutions of higher learning in the United States gets some type of federal funding, usually from multiple different agencies. And so what this administration is doing for the first time is holding those institutions accountable for their flagrant violations of federal law. Now, since the first Trump administration, we've had some developments in the law. One is Students for Fair Admissions, the seminal Supreme Court case that held that Harvard and some other schools, UNC, Chapel Hill, were in violation of equal protection by using quotas and suppressing the opportunities of certain races to get into these schools. And so that's been a sea change, because for decades these schools have really relied on quotas to achieve their, whatever Rainbow Coalition looks they like for their brochures, right, at the expense of white and Asian students, for the most part, qualified students. The second thread that's happened more recently in this Trump administration is a Supreme Court case that says that majority plaintiffs do not have a higher burden of proof than minority plaintiffs in employment discrimination cases. And there's a lot of employment discrimination along similar lines at these institutions of higher learning. That case is Ames versus Ohio. And so we've gone to these institutions and said, look, guys, you have to start complying with federal law. You can have to stop the racial discrimination, gender discrimination. There's some other things they're doing, like forcing girls to be in close quarter contact with men in the sports arenas. There's the gender surgery on children, which is being done by institutions that are receiving federal funding. There's some other policy issues as well. So we're saying, look, if you're in violation of federal law, under federal law, you can have your funding terminated. So it's a big coordination effort that we're doing between the DOJ, Health and Human Services, like any of these institutions that has a university hospital or research on medical issues. They're all getting money from HHS, NIH, et cetera. Some are getting money from the Department of Education, grants. Some are getting money from Department of Defense to do defense research and so forth, GSA. So there's so many different agencies. So it's really a very complicated endeavor. But one by one, we're approaching these top institutions, forcing change by negotiation. And I think it's a successful project. We've seen several institutions of higher learning come to the table and negotiate with us. And I think the culture of diversity of thought on campus is going to follow changes in personnel and the makeup of who the students are and who the faculty are. It isn't going to happen overnight. If we were even to impose a mandate on these institutions of higher learning, which we are not doing at our government, that they have actual parity in hiring of professors by political viewpoint, there aren't enough conservative professors in America to fill those schools. So it's going to be a pipeline process, but I'm confident that if we're able to make durable change in this area, it's going to have a very positive impact on American society at large and culture, because the young minds that are rotted with Marxist trash in college and are in an echo chamber politically, including a lot of foreign students with foreign agendas, they become your boardroom executives. Mm-hmm. They become your government supervisors. And so there's just a ripple effect of all of that. It isn't just good, clean fun at the college level.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because some institutions willing to come to the table and negotiate, others are much more aggressive.
Right.
And others are aggressive and pursuing policies that just tinker on the margins. They want to, that signals to me at least, that they want to continue to violate federal law, and it makes you wonder, why is these specific violations of federal law when it comes to woke issues or when it comes to DEI issues are such a sacred cow for them? You just wonder
easy.
why it's opening the door to them to be, the government to inject itself and say, hi, you are in violation of federal law. We need to address this problem promptly. All sorts of damages have been done over the course of these years by as you mentioned, suppressing representation at these institutions from white and Asian students. And yet they still want to keep themselves wide open to this type of treatment.
Well, look, one fundamental thing that people have to understand is that as we've had this vogue in academia of these sort of liberal progressive type of pseudo disciplines, women's studies and race studies and critical race theory and gender studies, okay? Those people come out of their schools with few marketable skills, but among those skills is becoming a diversity officer or DEI officer or equity officer, what have you, at some institution of higher learning or some corporation. So for decades, there's been a cadre of people who've, first of all, for affinity for the job, and also lack of, frankly, skills to do anything else, no science skills, no writing skills, no creative skills, they become professional race hustlers and, sort of DEI hustlers. Mm-hmm. And now those jobs are literally being eliminated in one fell swoop. And so they're fighting for their jobs. They're trying to keep their jobs. And it's a religion, it's a way of life, really, for some of these people. They're true believers.
That's such an interesting and good point, because there's an entire industry that's banking on this. It needs to be propped up.
I was in private practice for years, and my own law firm, we did not have any of this. Mm-hmm. But when I was in big law firms, or I was dealing with a client who has some diversity mandates in their law people, I didn't even do business with those law firms. But to get hired as an outside lawyer in any of these major American corporations, and there's a trial, they want the trial team to be diverse. So you have to then hire a bunch of people who may not be as qualified for the job just to staff the desires of your client, who in turn are virtue signaling to their institutional investors who have these requirements. And so these race hustling lies have actually permeated every level of our society. And then there's influence groups that put pressure on boards that you have to have diversity quotas and criteria, and that flows down to all the vendors, and the vendors can't compete unless they're going along with it. I mean, I managed to have a successful law firm that didn't do any of that, but when I was in big law firms, that's how they would pitch their cases. They would make sure some diverse people are on the team to, pitch the case and so forth. And someone asked me what I think is one of the most critical civil rights issue of our time that's on a daily basis. And I said, I think it's not even in the Bill of Rights, it's the fact that Americans feel like they have to lie every day to get through the day. They have to lie about pronouns. They have to lie about the person in the cubicle next to them being qualified if they aren't. They have to pretend to laugh at and like certain types of jokes, the late night comedians when they don't agree with them. They have to tell their friend in the book club that it's really cool that they're transitioning their 5-year-old child when they don't believe that. So it's ultimately very corrosive to our souls, but also to our society to constantly be lying. So personally, I feel it's very refreshing to not have to lie.
It is. Tell the truth. It's really simple. And that answer explains why these violent left-wing organizations that are capturing headlines now use these universities as incubation chambers for the next generation of their activists, of their rioters. You have more experience than any lawyer I can think of in the United States with these violent left-wing organizations. How do these institutions work? Because a lot of people in the past have said that these violent left-wing organizations are just ideologies and they're just ideas.
Yeah.
But you know personally it's more
I've dug into it as a lawyer on a few different cases that have been in the news. First of all, dating back to the UC Berkeley situation, Berkeley wasn't allowing certain speakers to come on campus because one or two of them had attracted a negative reaction from Antifa types, black bloc, what have you. And so that was the excuse that Berkeley gave and other schools have given for charging conservative student groups much higher security fees. It's called a heckler's veto. So we saw that, and they were immediately able to basically shut down conservative speech on campus by rioting a little, okay? And similarly, you saw the Black Lives Matter movement, you've seen Occupy Wall Street. These are all strains of different, sort of European-centric Marxist violent ideologies that have come to the United States. Now, the most dangerous and pernicious of these is Antifa, and standing for anti-fascist, which is anything but, really. I became acquainted with a young journalist named Andy No back in the 2018, 2019 timeframe. I just saw his work online. He was talking about Antifa. He met me one time in San Jose. He wanted to meet me. He was visiting a family member, so I met him after court one day and got to become friends with him. And then he was violently assaulted in Portland while he was reporting on an Antifa rally/riot. Violently assaulted, and these criminals had tactical military gear, hardened gloves, weapons. They came to harm and maim. It's not a phenomenon we see on American streets typically. It's kind of shocking.
And all of them in the same outfit.
They're wearing masks.
This isn't just organic.
Pre-COVID, they're wearing masks on their faces, balaclavas, and their faces are covered, and they're there to do mischief and mayhem. And so I helped Andy in that situation as his lawyer. Eventually, he was attacked a second time, then he stopped doing his own because he became too recognizable to these criminals. And so he continues to report, but through proxies. And there's violence against the press is literally something that a civilized society like ours cannot tolerate. And yet we do tolerate it. Violence against the police. Portland Antifa, Seattle Antifa, they've put federal buildings and federal law enforcement, federal courts under siege. And so all I could do as a private lawyer in private practice is I had started a nonprofit, Center for American Liberty, and we represented Andy in suing Antifa. Kind of novel, because Antifa is a shadowy criminal organization, hard to file a lawsuit against someone, just hard to serve them, hard to find them. It's a very challenging case, and I'm proud of that case. case went on for years. We tried to serve people and all of that. We ultimately won a settlement from one of these criminals, and we won default judgments against some of them. We're never able to serve some of them. And
so what makes it so shadowy?
Well, they're shadowy on purpose. They operate in tiny cells like a terrorist organization. They use burner phones. I think they actually prey on and recruit disillusioned, disaffected young people in our society. Quite a few trans people are in the Antifa movement. I don't think I had seen more than one trans person in my life in the wild until the Andy Ngo case. And as I'm researching these people who attacked him, we would use videos, we would crowdsource who they are. Several of them were trans. I don't know if it's the hormones or the fact that they're unhappy with their lives that made them good targets for this sort of anarcho-terror organization, but they are. And so they form and they have their little cells, they do little things, and then they disperse. They have leaders who travel from city to city and riot to riot. So they have leaders. We were able to identify some of those leaders. Networks. And so Andy is really the expert on this. I would recommend anybody to read his books on these issues and his reporting. It's fascinating. It's a whole world I never knew existed. And frankly, for too long in this country, law enforcement hasn't done anything about it. And now the president has announced a focus on it. And so we have to get to the bottom of this because nobody is free. If there are cities in the United States with terror networks and cells plotting disruption of our transit or blocking our way to our courthouses or ICE or the police or journalists literally attacking the heart of truth in our society.
I'm so glad that you went back to what law enforcement needs to do on the federal and local level, because when we talk about issues like free speech, we think of suing a university because heckler's veto. But what you're seeming to outline here is that this is actually a much broader constellation, as our friend Michael Knowles has taken to saying in the days since Charlie's death, is you can't have a free marketplace of ideas. You can't have free speech if the marketplace keeps getting shot up. So it's a top to bottom effort to restore law and order in this country.
Yeah,
I mean, how is the DOJ going about that?
Well, let me talk about, first of all, how the DOJ has caused a problem in the past. Okay, so there are instances, every organization has a bad actor or two, and police brutality can occur, police misconduct can occur. We prosecute police brutality, police misconduct in my division, in the Civil Rights Division. I think we just got a prosecution this week of somebody who abused his trust to assault women in custody.
4 women, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but again, looking at this critical race theory approach towards restorative justice, you see from people like Kamala Harris and other people like that, sort of these woke prosecutors, their view is, well, there's a bunch of people who are African American who have been incarcerated, and there's over-incarceration. So let's solve that problem, not by perhaps offering opportunities to people in the inner city and helping them out of that lifestyle, but let's just arrest fewer of them and incarcerate fewer of them. And if a cop attacks somebody or happens to arrest somebody and uses extra force, let's put the whole police department under what's called a consent decree. Again, the Civil Rights Division is what has been doing that for decades now, enforcing entire sheriff's departments, police departments, cities to pay a federal court monitor tens of millions of dollars to supervise the police, make them fill out a bunch of extra paper. What happens? Good cops decide they would like to go across the river and work at that next police station across the next county that doesn't have these dumb issues that they have to deal with because they're not the one who arrested somebody falsely or shot somebody or did something wrong. They just happen to work in that police department. Everyone is paying the tax. And so the tax includes on the citizens a spike in crime because that's what happens when the cops can't do their jobs. And so cops get disciplined for doing their jobs. So they stop doing their jobs. I saw this in real life in the riot that took place in 2016 in San Jose, California, where I went to support my favorite candidate, Donald J. Trump, who came to speak at a rally there. It was only, I think, his first rally in California. He spoke at a big, convention center there. And I did the Pledge of Allegiance. It was a beautiful event. My husband and I went. My husband was a huge Trump supporter like me. We got to meet him backstage. I did the Pledge of Allegiance. He had a beautiful speech. And then we leave. And there's a bunch of cops there, of course, as a presidential candidate under Secret Service protection there. He got to speed out to the airport. But what happened next was really shocking in America. I'd never seen it before. There was a violent riot waiting for us when we left. And there was a bunch of cops. And these cops stood there and watched. Worse, they blocked the exits to safety. They would not allow us to go to the shortest route back to our garages where all the cars were parked. They trapped us in a canyon of violence and fear. People ranging from teenage to in their 70s had their glasses ripped off, hit in the head with bags of rocks, violent attacks on American citizens in San Jose, while 250 riot gear-clad police stood there and watched. I mean, it's a miracle that I didn't get injured. My husband and I and a friend of ours were able to barricade ourselves in a restaurant before they shut the doors. And I sued the San Jose police for creating more danger. I mean, they're not required under the law, unfortunately, to actually intervene, but they are required to not make it more dangerous for people, like blocking the safe exits. So what I learned in that case was, it wasn't that the cops didn't like Trump or something like that. That was not the case at all. The mayor did not like Trump. He tweeted some nasty things about how we kind of were asking for it. But it has become standard police practice in the United States to not engage. DOJ is responsible for that, in a way. Because when you engage with a riot, some people are going to get hurt. Some bad guys are going to get hurt. Maybe a couple of not so bad guys are going to get hurt. But we've tied the hands of the police to the extent now that they can't do their jobs, and they stand there and watch while rioting occurs in our American cities, in Minneapolis and Los Angeles and, in Louisville and you name it. And so the average citizen is defenseless. The average owner of a shop is defenseless. Mayhem and rioting and looting takes place in our cities. And we have come to accept that as a cost of society. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. This Department of Justice is not seeking consent decrees routinely for the occasional bad cop doing something stupid or illegal. We're prosecuting that cop. We're prosecuting potentially that cop's supervisors. We're forcing change in those policies. But we're not going to put the whole city at risk and all the citizens at risk for one or two people's mistakes. That's not productive. It's not what the citizens deserve. It's excessive overreach by the federal government. We are dismissing consent decrees. I've dismissed numerous consent decrees or consent decree investigations that I believe were built on junk science and flawed methodologies by the prior administration, who really had dozens of lawyers whose job all day, sitting remotely on their sofas, during COVID, was concocting really weak cases against police and police departments and law enforcement. We threw those out after reviewing them carefully. And so that's a material impact that has really allowed the cops to do their jobs. I've seen it here in DC, where I've lived for a few months. When the president invited in the National Guard and said, now we're going to have law enforcement, I think that all the cops are pretty happy, because their hands were untied for the first time. They could actually arrest people, do their jobs. We've seen the National Guard leave now, and I was just walking outside my building here. It's starting to disintegrate again a little bit.
Yeah.
I was walking near the White House just at the beginning of this National Guard deployment, and two different homeless people tried to, one tried to steal my phone, one tried to steal my water bottle 3 blocks from the White House. So, not good. So we need to make policing great again, and citizens have a right to expect safe streets and safety in their communities. It is literally, even I'm sure dating back to the caveman era, the first form of government, the first form of society is protecting one another from anarchy and violence. And if we don't do that in America, we can't have a civilized country.
Mm-hmm. I got one question for you before you go. I know you're tight on time, but given the civil rights office's involvement in this, the DOJ's involvement in this, at the same time, this was a plot by moneyed left-wing institutions to put some of these prosecutors in power on the local level. Mm-hmm. And now the Trump administration, of course, is very interested in this issue of election integrity. Mm-hmm. You guys have been asking for voter data in states like Oregon and Maine, and they have refused to comply. Another one of these sacred cow issues where, for some reason, these left-wing states and these left-wing municipalities don't want proper oversight of the voter rolls. What's the DOJ doing about states like Oregon and Maine to close this out?
Yeah, well, we are suing them because we're entitled to that data under several different federal statutes. It's our job to ensure that the states are maintaining clean voter rolls. That's a federal laws, I should say. Nebraska, some liberal groups in Nebraska filed a lawsuit against us yesterday. Probably a Mark Elias effort of some kind. And so they're fighting back. Why would they fight back? Why would a state not want their rolls to be clean? Why would a liberal organization or an organization not want the federal government to be able to do its job under federal law to assure the citizens that their vote is being counted once and only with other American citizens? I think we know the answer, and it's unacceptable. And I have a mandate from the president and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to aggressively pursue our rights in these cases, and we are doing that. And so we are engaging in litigation. You will see more action on that front, and ultimately courts will decide whether we have any ability to police our voter rolls or not.
Well, best of luck to you in the Civil Rights Division at the DOJ. Harmeet Dhillon, thank you so much for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.